radio on me once your voice starts going. You're getting ugly, Fred. That's what I'm saying.
We all good to go? Everybody's good?
Yep.
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this announcement. As the Minister of Justice and Public Safety, I believe it is crucial that people in Newfoundland and Labrador have faith in the administration of justice. In order for that to happen, proper oversight must be in place. In the absence of our own serious incident response team, we have to rely on the expertise of teams from outside the province. In the fall of 2015, the Department of Justice and Public Safety requested the support of Ron McDonald, the Director of Nova Scotia's Serious Incident Response Team, on a matter pertaining to RNC officers. Mr. McDonald led an 18-month investigation into the conduct of 2 senior officers following allegations that those officials improperly directed frontline officers not to arrest, investigate, or charge an individual who was seen as important to a police investigation. I am pleased to be joined by Mr. McDonald today, the Director of Nova Scotia's team, who prepared the report we are releasing today. And I'd like to welcome him now to share the results.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Good afternoon. I'm Ron McDonald, Director of the Serious Incident Response Team in Nova Scotia. I'm SIRT's first director, and we have been operational since April of 2012. SIRT conducts independent investigations of serious incidents involving police. In November of 2015, at the request of the Ministry of Justice and Public Safety of Newfoundland and Labrador, I agreed to assume responsibility for an investigation into allegations of obstruction of justice made against senior officers with the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. I was assisted greatly in this matter by 2 very experienced RCMP officers from Ontario, and I benefited from the important cooperation of the Department of Justice and Public Safety and from RNC management and its members. This investigation has taken approximately 18 months, longer than I hoped, but the right amount of time for the circumstances. In addition to being a matter that required that time due to complexities, travel, and having to be conducted on top of our usual duties, we took that time because we wanted to make sure our examination of this matter was thorough and complete. We know this endeavor was important to the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador, to the RNC and all its members, and, perhaps most importantly, to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. The allegations in this case were that certain senior officers obstructed justice. In particular, it was alleged that those senior officers told frontline officers to not investigate, apprehend, or charge an individual whom they saw committing criminal offenses. Indeed, it was the concerns of those frontline officers that led to the complaint. One can understand why this might lead to that result. Police officers are sworn to uphold the law. Being told not to arrest a person they see committing a significant offense is contrary to normal practice. In my report, I outline in some detail the test that must be applied when trying to determine whether a police officer has committed an obstruction of justice in these circumstances. I won't review that now in detail. In simple terms, it is well accepted that police have a discretion about whether they should lay a charge. For example, should an officer find a young person committing a minor theft, they may choose another way to deal with it other than a criminal charge. However, that discretion is not absolute. For instance, police officers can't decide to ignore a crime just to help out a friend. There must be good reasons to exercise the discretion, and in the end, the real test is that it must be in the public interest to do so. In this case, the RNC was conducting a large investigation into serious organized criminal activity. They were working hard at it, but the matter was ongoing. 2 senior officers, whom I referred to as Officer 1 and Officer 2, were concerned about the length of time this was taking. They wanted to solve this file and stop this activity, and they wanted it to happen as soon as possible. They were also concerned that more was needed to be done. One can understand their point of view. As a result, when they became aware of an individual who might be able to assist with the investigation, Officers 1 and 2, along with other senior members of the RNC, determined that attempting to gather further information about and from this person could be beneficial. Part of that process involved conducting surveillance of that person. It was during that surveillance that frontline officers responsible for watching this individual observed him commit some offenses, including 3 serious property offenses. They were given the instruction to not intervene and that property offenses would be tolerated, but anything involving personal injury would not. The reason for this is that Officers 1 and 2 determined that intervention would eliminate their opportunity to gain information from this person. It was important to them that that did not occur. The question for our investigation was whether this was an appropriate exercise of police discretion. In other words, did it make sense to not stop this individual from committing these offenses, including the serious property offenses, in order to solve a much more serious crime? In the end, I have concluded that the seriousness of the organized criminal activity, together with the need to do what could be done to solve it, justified the exercise of discretion to not investigate this person for those other offenses. In that regard, it must be remembered that decisions like this not be judged purely by hindsight. Rather, one must attempt to see the point of view of those who made the decision. In addition, it is not for me to say whether I would make the same decision, but rather, Officers 1 and 2 are only to be judged on whether their actions were reasonable or not. In this case, I have found that they were reasonable. Simply put, it made sense to let some property offenses go in an effort to solve much more serious offenses. I've also found that even if the discretion had been improperly exercised, which I did find, but even if it had, Officer 1 and 2 did this because they truly believed it was the best course of action to solve serious criminal activity. As a result, they had no intent to commit an offense of obstruction of justice and could not be guilty of a criminal act. One may wonder if this is the case, why this complaint ever came forward. In my report, I refer to the nature of the management we saw in this matter. I have referred to it as top-down and a style that did not engage well with frontline officers. While senior officers are entitled to give direction to officers they supervise, when it is done without adequate consultation and explanation to those officers, they may not understand why an order has been given, and this has the potential to, and in this case did, lead to understandable concern about the particular order. In that sense, I suggest errors were made by these senior officers that, if avoided, may have allowed the frontline officers to both better understand why certain steps were taken and understand why the order was given. However, I have most importantly found that the evidence does not support a conclusion these senior officers committed any criminal offense, and as a result, I am not recommending any charges in this matter. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Mr. McDonald and his entire team who assisted with this report, and I'd also like to thank the Nova Scotia Department of Justice for allowing us to use the services of the team. In the past year and a half that I've been minister of this department, there have been some very serious concerns within the RNC. I believe civilian oversight is needed here now more than ever. As minister, while I am confident in our police agencies, it has become obvious that there are issues. Police have extraordinary powers, but to exercise those powers effectively and efficiently, there must be checks and balances, and public confidence is vital. I read the news, I talk to people outside, I hear from people all the time. I am aware of the concerns that are being expressed by the public. However, I do have confidence in the more than 400 women and men who work to protect our public every day as RNC officers. It is time to change course and to rebuild trust. The RNC has to show leadership here, and I certainly expect leadership to be shown in these times when people are asking questions. I am asking questions too. The issues addressed in this report are about leadership and communication. We have an opportunity now for new leadership, and that is what we are in the process of doing. We look forward to working with the new Chief of Police, who we hope to have in place very soon. I can't go back and change what happened before I got here, but moving forward, I can take concrete action to help strengthen the RNC. New leadership, review of the RNC Act and other policies, and an independent civilian oversight team. I will work with the RNC as we move forward, and I will always keep in mind the best interests of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. I'd like to thank you for being here, and we can open the floor for questions.
Were any of those officers disciplined internally for this?
Again, I'm not going to speak about the specifics of that. That would be, I don't want to talk about any part of the investigation for fear of, getting myself in trouble. Again, any questions like that would have to go to the proper authority, which in this case would be the RNC, to talk about disciplinary measures. I have no say in disciplinary measures either.
You had mentioned before that you had confidence in the force, but you recognized that there were some public confidence issues. Did this report come as a shock to you?
Well, again, I've stated before that, I maintain that I have confidence in the officers who are out there every day. Again, I'm obviously I'm happy that this report was commissioned. It was done before I, got in this position, and I'm happy that Mr. McDonald and his team provided us with this report. And certainly, it confirms, that there are issues there in the RNC. And again, I can't change what happened before, but I can take action going forward to ensure that the public confidence in the RNC, which I think is important, I think it's necessary. We have to take these steps, and I'm prepared to do that.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what the oversight mechanisms you're looking at is? Is that the SIRT team for Newfoundland and Labrador? Is that a police services board? Is that, what is the range of measures you're considering?
Well, the first thing is we will have legislation in the House of Assembly this fall to deal with the creation of an independent civilian oversight team, our SIRT team. Where we are right now is determining whether we need one as a province or whether we can work together with, cooperate with our, Atlantic counterparts to work with that. Right now, Nova Scotia, I believe, operates with PEI, and I think there's work undergoing with New Brunswick. In fact, the 4 Atlantic premiers have discussed this. So that decision has not been made, although I'd like to think that the model Nova Scotia has is good, and I think we'll continue to work there. It's been a very good relationship so far. So that legislation will be there in the fall. Just yesterday, I met with the executive directors of the SIRT teams from across the country, and they were kind enough to offer me insight and sort of basically show us, the successes that they've had and the maybe some of the things that we should avoid as we move forward. And it was an excellent meeting, just some helpful, I think, practical advice on things we should do. One of the conversations we did have was on the oversight board, we'll say. That's something that, again, I think I've spoken about before, that certainly aware, willing to do research, but I want to get the team in place first. And I realize that's going to require a tremendous amount of work, and it's going to require cooperation with our police forces. That's one of the things that's been expressed by every other province that we've talked to. I'd also like to, look at the legislation that we have in place. I think legislative review is good for every piece of legislation, but given the issues that we've faced here, I think a review of the RNC Act and their policies needs to be looked at.
The change in leadership that we're seeing, is it related at all to this investigation and the things you referenced over the past?
Well, no. I mean, the change in leadership right now is based on the fact that Chief Janes, who came to me some time ago and advised us of his retirement after 30 years in the service. Once we knew that was happening, we immediately put a process in place to have a new chief, and actually we're looking at a new deputy chief as well. So it's not, this is related to Chief Janes giving us notice. And the way I look at this is when we see issues like this where we have some obvious leadership issues that are being expressed, communication issues, it's an opportunity. I'm going to take this very seriously, the responsibility I have in making sure that we put the best people in place to guide the RNC going forward, because as our policing goes, so does this department. It's a responsibility that we all share.
Do you think the public's faith could have been restored without a change in leadership of the RNC?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on that. I think that the public's faith in our police ultimately rests in many cases with me. I think, although it is a collective effort, but I'm taking responsibility here. I think that, again, there's been a number of issues that when I assumed this role that were sitting there, and I think we're taking a number of steps that will address the confidence issues that are there. There's no doubt that they're there. But again, the leadership thing was going to happen once we received the notice of retirement.
Is Chief James going to be involved in the selection of a new deputy chief, or is that going to wait for his successor?
I believe that a deputy chief should await the replacement of the chief. I think that if we're bringing in a new chief, that new chief should have some involvement in the appointment of a deputy chief. It's also an IAC process. We know that the Public Service Commission will be involved in the appointment of a new chief, the Independent Appointments Commission, and then ultimately it's an LGIC appointment. But I can tell you that it's something I'm going to take very seriously, because we need the best person possible in this position. I think that that's in the best interest of all of us, whether it's me here in the department, the general public. So, you know, if we don't put the right person in place, that's ultimately going to be, that's going to be on me. So I'm really, you know, we're putting a significant amount of work in that. And then part of that will be making sure that the chief has some involvement in the deputy chief appointment as well.
Any idea how much this investigation cost and what a CERT team locally or provincially would cost? Is that budgeted?
I haven't heard anything on the bill for this yet. What I would say is that that's something, you know, I think whatever it is, and again, the bills that we've received so far are certainly not extravagant by any means. In fact, the other departments of justice have been quite kind in making these resources available to us. Going forward, we don't have the budget in place yet for what the team will be. What I've heard from other teams is, obviously, if you want it to work well, you can't shortchange it. You have to give it the resources that it needs, because if you don't, you're going to have it, you're not doing what it's intended to do. But that's something that as we move into that process, and again, that budget will depend on, do we have our own model? Do we go with an Atlantic model? There's some intricacies there we need to work out.
Would this replace the Police Complaints Commission?
That's not a decision that we've made yet. That's something that's also under consideration. What are the best steps going forward?
It wasn't too long ago that that Chief James actually was saying that the Police Complaints Commission was perfectly adequate oversight for the RNC. Have you lost faith in them as an adequate means of oversight for the police force?
I fully believe that this province, as many other provinces have, need a civilian independent oversight team for the police. I stand by that, and I'll have legislation in our House of Assembly this fall.
What kind of things are you going to do now to ensure that this doesn't happen again, that you're in another situation where you're investigating the police?
Well, the first thing I would say is, this is certainly, is a workplace issue, and it might be impossible to completely avoid. We're dealing with humans. We're dealing with judgment, and it's hard to sit here now. This happens in every field where we have judgments made and errors. What I can do is, we need to put in strong leadership, because that steers the ship. That's going to guide how all of these officers operate going forward. And, I've had an opportunity to spend a lot of time with our frontline officers, and, they want strong leadership. And the other thing they want is civilian oversight as well. When I'm talking to them, and they know they're doing good work, but when you have police investigating police, there's the perception already of protectionism before you even start. And so they're telling me they want oversight, they're working with us, and that's what we're going to provide. But again, I'm also willing to look at policy, procedure, and the RNC Act to see, look, are there changes that can be made? I'm not going to prejudge how it goes, but these are the things we can do to ensure public confidence in the system.
Have you spoken to any of the officers or officer who made the complaint in this case to talk to them about the conclusion of the report?
No, I've received this final report last night. I haven't had any conversations on that.
In your view, what went wrong in this case?
Well, I think Ron might be better suited to talk about it. He has much more knowledge about the file. What I can say is that when this complaint came in, I actually wasn't in the department. When the request went out, I was not in the department, and I didn't have any hands-on involvement in this file whatsoever. It certainly was independent. My involvement is now, once we receive the report, is what do we do going forward. But I think Mr. McDonald can speak to that better than I can.
So as I've already said, and as you've seen in my report, I've concluded that in terms of criminal behavior, nothing went wrong, that there is no criminal behavior disclosed by this situation. That you you have a situation where in a difficult set of circumstances, the police had to make some tough decisions. When you say what went wrong, I would refer to the fact that from what we saw as an investigative team, there did seem to be a lack of valid communication both ways between senior officials and frontline officers, so that the frontline officers were left very dissatisfied about the situation they saw ongoing and the orders they were receiving. And I attribute that to that lack of communication, that if they had understood better why these decisions were being made, I think, quite frankly, they would have been much more likely to have understood and accepted those orders that they were receiving. So in that sense, you have and the reason I refer to it in my report, I thought it was connected to the criminal investigation as to why did this come forward. I thought it was important for me to comment on that aspect.
Some people are going to be fairly concerned about the fact that the police are turning a blind eye on serious property offenses. How common is this sort of thing, and was it justified?
So I've found that in the criminal context, it was justified. Is this common? No, this is not common. It's not unheard of for police to make compromises when they need to attempt to solve serious crimes. I'm sure your listeners and viewers are well familiar with many types of cases they've seen both here and across the continent, where those types of decisions have to be made. They're difficult, tough decisions. Policing is a tough job, and when you're faced with serious organized criminal activity that the RNC was in this case, sometimes you have to make those decisions. So when you judge those decisions, it's very important to remember that hindsight isn't the only lens you must apply. You must try to put yourselves in the shoes of the individuals who are making those decisions, and that's why at law was it reasonable or not? In this case, I find it reasonable. Does that mean that everybody might be happy by it? That some person who suffered or was a victim of a serious property offense might be unhappy? They might be. But in the overall, one must look at the overall public interest, and I found that it was met in this case.
How does that work? Do you go to the people who had the crimes committed against them and say, by the way, we know this happened to you, we know the guy who did it, but we're not arresting him because...
I don't know.
Do the police do that here? I mean, because if people had offenses committed against them, and they're out there thinking, okay, well, was this me? And why didn't anybody ever solve this crime? Well, now I know why. I'd be pretty upset if it were committed against me.
That's a valid question, but it's really one that's outside of my realm. I can only judge what I saw.
When it came to the
Minister, you wanted to...
I can speak to that and say, firstly, I'm not a police officer, so I'm not involved in operations and can't speak to, how these decisions are made, but I can certainly understand the public having concern with this. I would echo, I guess, what Mr. McDonald has said, is that in many cases there's tough decisions made about the greater good, but these are things that obviously that the RNC need to look at. And you know what, I'm sure we can look at, as Ron said, across the continent and see, are these things being done? And you have to judge them by what are they trying to achieve. But as a general citizen, yeah, I'm sure that these individuals would be concerned and upset.
In this case, these decisions were made for the purpose of solving serious crimes that involve much more serious organized criminal activity. Did those crimes get solved in this case?
Given the nature of the investigative techniques that were used, the identity of individuals involved, and other legal issues, we've very carefully looked at how we can report this case, and in this circumstance have determined that I'm not able to tell you answers such as that, one way or the other, for fear of identifying certain individuals.
You spoke about communication with the frontline officers, but was there an issue with communication higher up the chain? Was the chief aware that this was happening?
Yes, the chief would have been aware, but remember that operational issues are typically left to the officers who were at the level of the individuals that I was investigating.
When it came to the criminal offenses that were witnessed by the officers, specifically the property offenses, but also the driving offenses, were members of the public ever put in danger as a result of these decisions?
I would say no. Based on the facts that we're aware of, nobody was actually in danger.
Some people might listen and think there was a double standard. I mean, in this case, it seems like intention was really important. But if I were caught speeding, my intention wouldn't matter. So why does it matter what the police officer's intention is?
Well, this isn't a law school class, but speeding you don't need to intend to speed to be found guilty. But sorry, that's not a criminal offense. It's a Motor Vehicle Act offense or a Traffic Safety Act. But in the criminal context in particular of this offense of obstruction of justice, there is a specific intent required to obstruct justice. And the Supreme Court of Canada has told us that if police, even if police make the wrong decision about whether or not they should have exercised their discretion, if that decision was made for a reason other than to obstruct justice, they can't be found guilty of it. So I'm only really quoting you what the Supreme Court of Canada says. So in this case, for example, the officers did it because they believed it was necessary to solve crime. They didn't do it to favor themselves. They didn't do it to favor a friend. They didn't do it for any racial or cultural reasons. And in that regard, I have found that even if I had said the discretion was inappropriately exercised, they still couldn't have been found guilty of this offense.
Was it a difficult decision to reach, or was it cut and dry for you?
It was difficult from the sense that this was a complex case, involved a gathering of a great deal of information, a review of, as I've noted, thousands of pages of materials. But at the end of the day, my team and I, once we had all of the information, which was particularly furthered by our interviews done with the subjects of the investigation, we realized clearly that this did not constitute criminal activity.
Is there a second investigation that you're doing in relation to this case?
This is my only investigation criminal investigation, the only criminal investigation in relation to this case.
Are there any other investigations underway involving the Newfoundland Constabulary by Conservation Service?
Well, as you know, I've been asked to review a matter by the minister, and I have received, I'm sorry, but I forget the name of the individual involved, but that was sorry, yes, Mr. Buckle. I have received those documents only recently. They had to be digitized for me. We like to work in digital formats.
So there are no other investigations, criminal or otherwise, that you are undertaking in relation to the role?
So, at this point, even if that type of question leads to this type of answer, I'm not in a position to either confirm or deny that type of question.
Mr. Parsons, you did confirm earlier this year that there was a second investigation happening in relation to the RNC. Has that concluded?
No.
Mr. McDonald, may I ask your background? Are you a former police officer yourself?
No.
or-
No, I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for almost 32 years. I was a defense lawyer for almost 7 and a Crown attorney for 20 prior to taking on this job.
When do you expect that report to be completed in response to your question?
The answer, I guess, is like any. I hope they're done soon, but same as this one, I don't put any timelines on. We respect the time that's needed to make sure that it's done, and the fact that we're bringing teams in from outside who have regular workloads. So I'd like to see anything done very quickly, but fully realizing we have no control.
Is that distinct from the Tim Buckle investigation?
I'm not going to comment on any investigation whatsoever or any facts. I'm not going to insert myself into that. We all good? All right. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.